Welcome to the Authority File, the academic library podcast from Choice, brought to you by Sage Publishing. I'm Bill Mickey, the host of the podcast and the editorial director at Choice. For this series on the research methodologies around and library support of big data, I'm joined by Caroline Mulia, Head of Resource Sharing and Co-Associate Dean of Collections at the University of Southern California, Amy Solis, Social Sciences Data Librarian at USC, Andy Rakowski, Visualization Specialist at USC, and Ian Mulvaney, Head of Product Innovation at Sage Publishing. This week, we're continuing our conversation about big data by examining the specific services and instruction the USC libraries are providing to students and faculty. From a typical day of workshop and service activities to staffing considerations, we'll get a close look at the front lines of library engagement with big data research. All right, I want to dig in a little bit to what this actually looks like in practice, and maybe use USC as a little bit of a case study for our listeners. And I'm wondering if you both could help us understand, what a typical day of big data related activities looks like. What are some of the specific services you're providing for students and faculty, and the outreach you're doing, and that kind of thing?
I would go back to the definition of big data and how it differs depending on the researcher's discipline and what their data needs are. So, as Andy mentioned before, it is more of a partnership than it is services.
Okay.
I've been at USC for 7 months now, so in terms of just beginning this type of partnership, I've been really trying to help individually either faculty or students through understanding, the whole data life cycle, right? So exploring their topic, what their data needs, seeing how they can gather their data and then manipulate it and hopefully disseminate it and eventually store it, right? So providing them with information about the library and also outside the library's services that they may use for every section of the data life cycle. So that's been really interesting because they're all very different.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Working with individually and partnering with researchers is all very unique.
Okay. So then, Andy, following on to that, are there, I guess, have you been able to develop, for lack of a better word, I guess, modules that could be more structured than what Amy's describing in terms of sort of coming at a project based on what the needs of each individual is, or I'm thinking of workshops, I guess.
No, absolutely. I think building on what Amy was saying, I think that we have identified some maybe broad themes around sort of, this is, we see a lot of this when students come in working on data. And I think one of the things is really getting students to think about, maybe for lack of a better word or descriptor, sort of having a project plan and kind of project management skills. I think that's one of the big things where you have, and this is again where I think, we're emphasizing this partnership model because our interactions with students, they really can almost never be a one-time, that typical reference transaction of a lot of librarians where you kind of meet with the student once and you kind of go through all the resources, you go through everything, and maybe there's one follow-up. I think that's never the model that we have. I think it's constantly sort of building and having sort of, or just getting students to think about project management has been something that I've tried to build into workshops and just sort of build into even reference interviews and kind of thinking about that sort of more long-term approach to working with data. I think another part that I've kind of tried to build into this too, and I think this is a nice role that libraries can maybe serve and kind of frame the questions is sort of maybe ethical considerations for working with, creating data, approaching it, and I think especially maybe in sort of the stages of gathering and kind of working with communities. We're at the University of Southern California. We're close to South LA, and there's a lot of research that is going on in terms of especially gentrification here, and you have students going into the neighborhood, oftentimes gathering and working with data, and a lot of reference interviews sometimes is just sort of talking about, well, how are you gathering this? How are you approaching this? And have you kind of considered sort of your responsibility in terms of getting and using and how you're going to be using that data in your project? I think that's another really big role that I think we as libraries can kind of come in and talk about that and provide some guidelines and some direction, I think.
Oh, that's a great point. So just kind of following on to that, I mean, who can you give us a sense of maybe the variety or who really is doing this kind of research, the big data type of research, and anecdotally, like the gentrification study, what other projects are standing out for or have stood out for you guys?
I'll just toss out a couple of examples, but the students and faculty who I kind of know and work with, I think, to say who's doing big data at USC, I think, a lot, all over campus, but
yeah,
we do have a Spatial Sciences Institute, which, specifically does mapping and GIS work, and they are doing all sorts of work, around transportation, around health, just anything that, has location, has place, they're doing it. And obviously for those areas, there's a lot of data out there. The other departments that really just come to mind, Annenberg, which is our School of Communications and Journalism, they also are really working, I think, with a lot of data, especially just we were all talking about this before, but just the sheer amount of media data that is out there, and just sort of parsing through Twitter, parsing through social media, parsing through data like that is incredibly difficult and happening. And then I think the school that Amy and I think work a lot with is the Price School. So this is our policy school, and again, these are the students and faculty who are really looking at Los Angeles and just sort of approaching all of these policy issues, and LA. This is a place maybe where we can tie in the city and just sort of open data movements. LA in the last 5 years has really provided more and more access to the city, that is, has provided more and more access to their data. And that in turn has provided schools like Price here at USC, Luskin over at UCLA with just enormous amounts of information that they can use for research.
And are you facilitating that with the city, or are you getting involved with representatives, locally to sort of make the connection between the city and the students and faculty there at USC?
In different ways,
yeah.
That is happening. Absolutely. I mean, I can maybe give two sort of broad examples. One of the great events actually that Spatial Sciences has put on for the past, I think it's going on 7 or 8 years now. They have a geospatial summit. It occurs sometime in January or February. And it really brings together sort of academic community around LA, but then also brings in the city. And so there's, keynotes from the city, keynotes from academic, and you kind of are, everybody's sort of brought into the same room to see, who's working on what kind of data is being, collected, shared out. And then you can just talk to people about that. And I think that's an amazing event. And then just the other thing, again, I think this is because of all this data coming out, but LA has an amazing sort of community around sort of different groups that are doing, like Hack for LA, Map Time LA. You have these civically minded groups, and a lot of the people who attend these meetings are from the city, who work in city agencies, and that's where we kind of can have this conversation.
Sage Publishing has just released a new video collection on the Sage Research Methods platform called Practical Research and Academic Skills. These 400 video titles cover the practical skills needed to conduct successful research, including project and time management, writing for publication, and presenting work. There is also an essay writing kit appropriate for anyone learning to write college-level papers, and information on pursuing careers in research. Students looking to continue in academia will find information on building professional networks and presenting at conferences. These tips are presented through engaging videos, which include tutorials and animated videos. Go to sagepub.com to learn more and to find information on free trials. Amy, you and Andy have both come from institutions that had bigger teams, and Amy, perhaps since you're fresh on the scene there, I'm wondering if you could describe what it's been like to provide, these types of partnerships and services. I mean, what advice would you offer to other similarly staffed libraries?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think first of all, when you have institutions with well-defined data service with big team, there's usually one person that's an expert in qualitative software. You have another one that's an expert in quantitative software, and having a smaller team, you don't have that luxury, right? Yeah. And so the first piece of advice is just identifying what your own skills should be and having goals. Like, for example, I currently am teaching myself statistical software so that I can provide workshops during fall, so fall 2018. Being able to first identify, the skills you lack and advocate for training and the software you need to be able to help the students and faculty members, right? Mm-hmm. And I would also say just identifying what your institution already has in terms of already defined partnerships with other departments outside the library. Also looking at your institution's own data sources that one can leverage to teach students about data. Mm-hmm. For example, here at USC, one of the key resources is ICPSR, which stands for Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research. And this is a great resource because it's basically a data archive, and it provides a large number of qualitative and quantitative data sets along with the publications that stem from that. So it's great because it has a wide range of topics like education, criminal justice, and it helps, again, I mentioned before, it's really important to identify, how one can fit into every aspect of the data lifecycle. And ICPSR is definitely one of those resources where you can, even towards the end, if USC faculty have this great data set, they can submit to have it archived in ICPSR. So that's a great tool and resource available to them. So being able to, identify what great resources one has in one's own institution and try to work with it and get as much out of it as possible. And also, I think I always want to always point out, maybe because I am also the government documents librarian, is government data is free for anyone in any institution, and it's a great source for large data sets. And more, just like Andy described, Los Angeles, the city having more open data, the federal government has been doing that for years, and now has even allowed researchers to use an API to get gather data from their resources like data.gov, and they offer their data in bulk as well. So doing outreach for those types of resources and letting faculty and researchers know that, that data is available to you guys if you do need big data sets that the content isn't that that interesting to them. They just want giant data sets. The federal government does an excellent job in providing that.
Well, I can imagine. In the cases where this might make sense, have you guys put together any kind of research workflow for big data projects? And if you have, what do those look like? And earlier, Andy, I think you mentioned, project management has become a sort of a big component to these types of engagements, but I'm wondering if there's other pain points for researchers along the way, and what other strategies you might use to lessen those.
That's, again, a really good question. I mean, I think it sort of goes back to this idea of a data life cycle of sorts. Yeah. And I think that's one of those things too, where I find myself more and more, regardless of maybe the workshop that I'm doing, whether it's just like one of these very necessary and introductory sort of, here are library resources for some of our spatial science institute students. I kind of try to frame things within this data life cycle, which kind of brings together all sorts of the aspects of the types of work that Amy and I do, which is, asking the right questions about the data that you're using so that you can find it, so that you can identify it, so that you know that it's the right sort of data that to use. And then the idea of, all right, so once you do have it, well, now what? What are you going to have to do with it in order to kind of generate an output that is going to answer some questions or pose some questions for you, or do whatever you want it to kind of do. So kind of that life cycle involves finding data. Then once you find it, kind of the process of working with it, whether it's cleaning it, whether it's enhancing it. And then once that part is done, that process then turns into, what tools, what sort of process are you going to go through in terms of creating maybe a visualization with it. And then once that visualization has occurred, you reiterate. And this goes to, I think it really does go back to that project management idea. But just because you've created a visualization, that doesn't stop there. You refine it, you use it to ask more questions, you bring it back, and this process is very circular. And I think that's why I really love the idea of kind of looking at it through this life cycle. And then it brings us to publication. So once you do finish it, does it go into ICPSR? The journal that you're working with, what's their policy for providing access to the data that you've used? And that's like an incredibly important part where we're working with people who are creating a publication using data, but submitting it to places where maybe the access to that data isn't transparent, and you have to figure out, well, how am I going to sort of share that out? So I feel like we haven't gotten to the point where we've gotten this here's this life cycle. There's lots of models of different life cycles, and it's very easy to put out there. But in terms of actually putting in some sort of more concrete pieces in there, beyond some of the workshops that we've done, we haven't really defined that, because I think, again, it goes back to each researcher has been so unique. You're kind of rewriting the script. So kind of leaving it a little bit more general is just, I think, very helpful and just practical as a way of doing it. You kind of have that rough outline, and you kind of adapt and use it.
You just heard from Caroline Mulia, Amy Solis, Andy Rakowski, and Ian Mulvaney. This concludes the third of our four-part series on big data research and how libraries support it. This episode was brought to you by Sage Publishing. Be sure to join us for our final episode of this series, where we'll look ahead at how we can start building more open approaches to research and tool development, creating a more sustainable model for all involved, and how libraries are supporting broader institutional goals with their activities around big data research.
But there's no doubt that getting researchers to get to the point where they're happy to share their data, particularly in the social sciences and the humanities, is a really big uphill battle. And so I think there are things that we can do as a community to try to continue to encourage that. I think we can tell stories about how helping them to think in this way can benefit themselves later, because by placing their data into a place that others can access it, it enforces some behaviors which makes it easier for them to work with their own data later.
Find all of the episodes of The Authority File on your favorite podcast app or on our website, choice360.org. Just click on the librarianship dropdown. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.